The good old video game manual, practically a relic of the past at this point. Most people who grew up with video game manuals have fond memories of these suckers. But why is that? Well, it just made a physical copy of a game feel more complete, more substantial. Like, hey, this video game is such a big deal that it comes with an entire little book written about it. For some gamers, it was even a part of the ritual before playing a game. You'd read the back of the box or case, and then you'd read through the manual before finally playing the game. Manuals were always something that were just kind of assumed, perhaps even taken for granted, until one day this happened, and then we all realized just how much they meant to us. Of course, this is indicative of what things have come to with modern games. The very design philosophy of more modern games practically made video game manuals obsolete. Games started to hold our hands more and more, explaining how every little thing in the game works, to the point that having a manual became less and less important. In a way, it makes sense, because some more modern games require explanation just to do some of the most basic functions like movement, jumping, and attacking. It would be annoying to have to keep checking a manual just to know how to do such simple things. But manuals aren't just about telling you how to play the game, they can be fun little companions that enhance the experience. It's almost like a pamphlet for an amusement park that gets you excited for some of the attractions in the park. For example, in Donkey Kong Country, I'll never forget seeing all the different animal buddies in the manual. It doesn't tell me exactly where I'll find them, just that they exist and can do awesome stuff, so that I'm excited to try to find them as I play through the game. Something to look forward to. And sure, some manuals are definitely better than others, but that's part of the fun, evaluating how good the manual is for a given game, like how big the notes section is. Actually, the biggest thing that typically jumps out to me is whether or not it's in color, and not just the outside of it, but the pages inside too. Not to mention how many pages there are. This helps hit home the fact that a lot of care went into the game and vice versa. For example, what the hell is going on with this? Did somebody just go to FedEx with their stapler? I think one of the best examples for manuals done justice would be most anything from Working Designs back in the day. For those who don't know, Working Designs was a publisher that gives a lot of us retro gamers fuzzy warm feelings because they would bring games from Japan to the US market. And not only would they bring them over here, but they do a great job doing so, with the packaging of the games having a ton of care put into them, and perhaps more than anything that applied to the manuals. I mean, just look at this manual. It's all shiny and embossed, makes you feel like the game must be something super cool. And then the pages inside are really detailed with color artwork throughout and a ton of useful information about the game. And speaking of game manuals that include a ton of information, check this out. It's the manual for NHL 94. This is insane. It feels like an encyclopedia. This makes the game seem way more hard to play than it actually is. I should also point out that while manuals are great for cartridge-based games, they're not nearly as essential for completeness as they are for CD-based games. The biggest reason why is that manuals also double as the cover artwork for CD-based games. I mean, they'll look okay all together, but if you ever want to pull a game out, ew. Of course, once games switched over to more DVD-style cases, the cover artwork became its own separate sheet of paper, but then if you open it up and nothing's there, it just creates this sinking feeling like something is missing. And that's a feeling we've gotten used to with newer games. I know some of us definitely prefer even just having some spammy advertisements shoved in there just so it has something. And while we're talking about manuals in more modern games, or rather the lack thereof, we do at least get some manuals with indie releases of games, funny enough. The idea here is that these games would remain digital only if it weren't for the publishers like Limited Run Games trying to cater to the fans' demand for a physical copy. So they know we're going to appreciate everything inherent about a physical copy of a game, and naturally a manual is a cool part of that. And sure, maybe we'll only ever look through it the first time we see it, if ever, but just knowing it's there makes the game feel more complete. Does that make it a waste of paper? Well, yeah, I can see that argument. Regardless, I still think the primary motivation for game companies getting rid of them goes hand in hand with the push to get us to buy games digitally. It's just less stuff they need to give us and less work on their part. Therefore, higher profit margins. They started by getting rid of the manuals and would eventually like to just get rid of physical releases altogether. I think that's a big part of what bothers gamers the most. Getting rid of manuals just doesn't feel like a very pro-consumer move, and gamers have the right to be skeptical with all the other bullcrap they've been trying to normalize, like microtransactions, always online, loot boxes, so on and so forth. That's a video for another day. Anyways, the death of manuals is something we could all see coming from a mile away, with the quality of them getting crappier and crappier towards the end. Even more bare bones, which came around the time of the latter half of the PS3, Xbox 360 generation. Credit to Nintendo for still putting some effort into it, even towards the end though. Check out this Mario Galaxy 2 manual from 2010. This thing is huge, in full color, and sure, it's because they just repeated the same things in a handful of different languages, but you could use this thing to really whack somebody. But sure enough, even Nintendo eventually did away with manuals, and I always thought it was funny how during the transition period they would include what sort of looked like a cheap manual, just telling you that the real manual was an electronic one. Awesome, I'll be sure to check it out. Not. I doubt anyone hardly ever looks at electronic manuals, and it kind of makes me feel bad for whoever it is that designs them. Not that that would be a bad job now that I think of it. Anyways, you can add manuals to the list of cool things that make older games different from newer games. And that leads me to my question for all of you. What are your thoughts on video game manuals no longer being around? Do you miss them? And as it pertains to retro games, which systems do you like to collect the manuals for when buying games for it? For me, I collect them for everything except the cartridge-based games, because like I said before, I like how cartridges look displayed on their own. And you know, the fact that I don't collect the manuals for cartridge games is probably evidence that I don't miss manuals that much, if I'm being honest. If I'm ever curious what a manual for one of these games is like, there are luckily scans of all of these manuals you can find online that I'll occasionally take a look at if I'm curious. Not as good as the real thing, of course, but still nice to have. Okay, so be sure to leave your answers or any other thoughts you may have in the comments down below, and I will see ya in the next video.